everybody. Welcome to Vida Tennis, the podcast for those of us who eat, sleep, breathe tennis. My name is Jennifer Gelhaus, and I'm your host. Today, I'm talking to a fellow yogi, tennis player, and tennis coach, Margit Bannon. She's a USPTA elite professional with 23 years of coaching experience. She's the director of tennis at Play Tennis Practice Yoga in Punta Gorda, Florida, where she offers a unique tennis yoga fusion that's great for players of all levels. She played for Miami University, where she was a MAC Conference Rookie of the Year. Margit works for the Miami tennis teams, and she will be offering yoga to players at the Sarasota Open in April. You can follow her on her YouTube channel or Instagram page for amazing weekly tips. Welcome, Margit. Did I get all that right?
You did. Thank you so much. Thank you for having me and help me spread this yoga for tennis love.
Of course. Now, you are in Punta Gorda, right? And are you at your own tennis court, or is this, are you at a club? Where are you?
Yeah, so I'm in Punta Gorda, which is about 100 miles south of Tampa, and I am at my own private residence. So yes, it's a private tennis court, and about 5.5 years ago, I formed my business, Play Tennis Practice Yoga.
That's awesome. So you get to do your own thing.
Yes. It took a little while. Yeah, it took a little while for me to kind of get the courage to leave the clubs I was working at. But yeah, it's at my house. The house when we first moved in, the court was not in not so great of shape, and we decided to resurface it. And I decided to make the move to do my own thing, just so that I could have a little more flexibility. No pun intended, but to be able to do some different things with my tennis teaching and to be able to incorporate the yoga.
Oh, wow. That's great. And how did you decide that coaching tennis, for example, was a career path for you? Because before we get into all the yoga stuff, I just want to know a little bit about, how did you get into tennis? You have a lot of experience. Did you always know that you wanted to be a tennis coach, or how did that part come about?
Well, that was a little bit of a mistake. I didn't really know that I wanted to be a tennis coach. Obviously, I grew up playing juniors, and I played college tennis at Miami University in Oxford, Ohio. And basically, I was fresh out of college, wasn't exactly sure what I was going to do, and went to one of the local clubs to kind of figure out where I could play locally. I had just moved to Columbus, Ohio. I just gotten married. And when I went to some of the local clubs that I had played at as a college player, one of the pros convinced me to sub in for them when they couldn't teach one of their classes. So I kind of started teaching, and then I kind of realized that it was kind of fun to get to be in my sweats all day and to get to play tennis and get paid for it. It didn't feel like work at the time. Mm-hmm. So I just started that way. But I was there for a couple of years, and then I took it a little more seriously when I moved to Florida. And I feel like teaching in Florida is a completely different teaching game than other places. And just kind of got into it slowly, and my love for it grew a little bit more and more from there.
How do you think it's different? How is Florida different?
Well, I was teaching indoors up north. I was at a club that had very many pros. It was hard to get court time. So the setting is very different. In the summers, we go off to different clubs apart from where we are in the winter. Where I am in Florida, I'm in a small town, but we have clubs, and they're kind of spread out, and you can teach year round. And I think there's an opportunity to teach all day long if you want to. And I don't know, maybe mentally I took it more seriously because I had a couple of years under my belt. And at first it was a little more, I would say maybe for fun. And I was pretty young too. So I just kind of learned more about teaching, and, I educated myself a little bit more on that end, got certified through the USPTA. And I guess mentally I decided that that's what I wanted to do.
Yeah, I actually started teaching in Cincinnati.
Okay.
So I was when I graduated from college, I did research. I was a scientist for 4 years doing research, and then I got coaching college. And I lived in Indianapolis at that point, and then I moved to Cincinnati to fully pursue coaching full time. and I was at a couple clubs there, and yeah, it was very different. The indoor, I actually love indoor. It's my favorite because it's fast, and I just love that pop. When you hit the ball, it feels so good. There's no wind, no sun. It's just like perfect conditions, right? So I really loved the indoor side of it. But then I was like, winter is not my thing. Moved to Florida, and yes, Florida is a
Yep.
very different situation. One of the things actually, and I don't know if you experienced this, it was that when I was in Cincinnati, a lot of, I worked for two different clubs, but I know that it was the same situation at multiple clubs. The teaching jobs there actually offer benefits like a 401k, health insurance, all these things. And here in Florida, like everything is you're an independent contractor and you're on your own. Did you experience that at all? Or
Yes. Yeah, I definitely have. In some of the, let's say, higher level teaching positions up north, if you were to go to a club and you were a director or the head professional, you might be offered benefits. But where I was in the winter, I was not. I was an independent contractor, and definitely in my town where we are, we're all independent contractors for sure. So yeah, it's not always the easiest.
Okay. Maybe I just got lucky because I was just an assistant pro and I had benefits, and then I moved to Florida, and
that's great.
Nowhere offered that. And so I didn't know if it was an Ohio thing or indoor thing, because I haven't been back teaching up there since then. It's been now, I don't know, over 10 years. But I always wondered about that. And then how did you start practicing yoga? How did you get into that whole world?
So I actually started practicing yoga because pretty close to the time I started teaching tennis out of college, I had a very bad low back injury. I was very much into working out. I don't know if you experienced this, but after college, you kind of experience a loss because you're so used to being a tennis player. You feel like your identity is lost. You've lost that schedule of training all the time. And so I really got into training in the gyms, and I experienced a very bad low back injury. And so I went to physical therapy, and through my physical therapist, they had offered some yoga classes in the evenings at the physical therapy office. And so when I actually tried yoga, I didn't love it. It was in a dark room. I didn't even have a mat. I had a towel. I was slipping all over the place. I didn't know what I was doing. But that was my first experience with yoga. I knew that it was good for me and that I should be doing it. And it took me, I think it was like 4 years. It took me 4 years to try it again. I just went with a different instructor. It was at one of the gyms I was working out with. I had one of those passes where I could work out all over the city, as long as it was the same gym. And I really fell in love with yoga. And I was really scoping out classes to see how many I could take to fit in with my teaching schedule. And I really just became addicted to it. So that was my first experience with yoga. And then when I moved down to Florida, it just so happened that one of the clubs that I was teaching at lost their yoga instructor. And so they asked me if I wanted to teach. And at the time I wasn't certified. And so that's when I got my first certification, realized I didn't know enough to be teaching, and then got my full 200-hour training certification through the Yoga Alliance. Incredible. So again, it was kind of a happy accident.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I was going to say. Incredible what can happen when you say yes to things, even if you're not, certified or fully prepared, and you just go for it, and then you might.
Yeah, I just figured this is a good way to see if I like teaching yoga. So the first certification was like a minimal weekend, like 18-hour certification. It was called Yoga Fit. That still exists at this time. And it appealed to, people in the fitness industry. And while I didn't feel prepared, because there's so many variables to teaching, of course, especially in these mixed level classes, I realized that I enjoyed teaching. And that's when I said, okay, let me go ahead and do this because I love it. Of course, you always have that fear that if you turn something you love into something you teach, are you going to lose the love for it? Or are you going to be able to still practice yourself, that sort of thing? But little by little, it just kind of blended itself into my tennis teaching on a daily basis, especially when I went off on my own. So obviously I'm glad that I did.
Yeah. And it's funny because I went through the same thing also when I graduated from college. You know, you're so used to having a set routine for your workouts, your tennis. You don't even have to think about it. Actually, sometimes you might even avoid, training or doing anything because you're exhausted, and you look forward to the day that you don't have to do it until that day.
Right. It's a lot.
And you miss
Right.
it. Then you're
That's
like,
all you know. That's all you know. Yeah.
exactly. So when I actually started teaching tennis, I was, I don't know why, but maybe it's because it was the only way I knew how to, I guess get a good workout and burn calories. I was running a lot. I was running like 8 miles a day, and then I would go and teach tennis and play with the juniors. And I started getting plantar fasciitis issues. That's when I started thinking maybe I need to find different ways of exercising that are not running and killing my body. And I started, getting a little bit into yoga, getting into hot yoga. That was my first introduction to yoga that I really enjoyed, because like you, I used to be kind of like, this is a waste of time. This is boring. I'm not burning.
I'm not burning any calories. What's going on here? But it's so funny that you say this, because I almost have a very similar story from last year. I had a bout of plantar fasciitis that was horrendous. It lasted forever. I too had gotten into running over the pandemic. Running might not be the best activity for tennis pros who are already pounding pavement on court all day long. So I'm starting to realize that, we need to do these things that balance out what we're already doing. And obviously yoga is a great way to do that. That's less impact. We're able to restore the body. We're able to recover. So it's hard for individuals like ourselves. We're go, go, go. We're go-getters when it comes to working out and staying in shape. And now we're asking ourselves to slow down and do almost the exact opposite. So it takes an injury like that, a plantar fasciitis or a low back injury, something serious that really takes you out of the game, so to speak, to recognize something needs to change, right?
Yeah.
And as tennis players, I hope, we're doing all these other things like working out and all these fitness drills related to tennis. I hope that we're willing to do anything we can to stay in the game. And sometimes we have to consider other things, such as yoga, especially if it feels so foreign, especially if it's uncomfortable. That's where we can really grow as players. And not just as players, but as coaches, right? We need to stay healthy. We're notorious for not taking care of ourselves.
Yes.
And we have to care for ourselves so that we can care for those that we're teaching, and so that we can all enjoy the sport as it's meant to be, the sport of a lifetime, right?
And so we can continue to teach also, because one of the things I was encountering, and maybe not so much now because I've been teaching tennis for so long, but when you first start teaching, you're in your early 20s or whatever, you are asked to hit in a lot. And a lot of times, you don't get a proper warm up and you don't get a proper cool down. And then you just kind of go heavy hitting to nothing, back to heavy hitting, back to nothing. And that is horrible for your body, right? And
so I'm going to say, thank you so much for saying that, because, well, first of all, that was my initial experience to teaching tennis, that I was asked to be part of this, I think it was called competition development or something like that, where I would play in if there weren't even numbers, and I would just kind of set juniors up to play. And you're just being thrown in to play, then you jump out, you jump in. It is pretty scary. It's not great for the body, but I do have a little bit of a workaround for that, although I don't play in as much. As we get better at instructing tennis, there's so many different ways of teaching that don't involve us being the sparring partner. Yeah. But now I actually, as of maybe 2.5 years ago, include a dynamic warm-up as part of every single lesson, whether it's a lesson or a clinic. And as my little secret, it's not the students just warming up, it's me warming up too. So I do it with them. That way I know I'm warmed up as well. And that's helped me tremendously. And now, since I've made that my policy, my students comment that now they do it on their own. Their friends ask them what they're doing, because we're notorious, horrible for warming up, tennis players also.
Terrible.
But if we set the example as coaches, right, to save our players, but also to save ourselves, maybe start from a place of helping yourself out. Now they learn something that they can take with them. Maybe it spreads to their teams, maybe. And little by little, we start to educate that we should be warming our bodies up for sure, at the very least.
Oh my gosh, how many people, and myself included, okay, I'm not on this high horse because I still to this day catch myself doing it. You just walk on the court, do a little mini tennis, and then that's it. That's your warm up. It's a little mini tennis, and then you go and start hitting. You don't actually, do any dynamic stretching or any, kind of jogging, anything,
Right.
It's pretty bad, but that's why it's so good to, especially with junior players and even do it with the adults to create that culture of, hey, let's take care of the body. And sometimes, for example, with adults, it's a little bit harder because at clubs, they're so used to doing things a certain way. You might have an hour and a half clinic. And if you say, hey, we're going to do a dynamic warm up, they might look at you like you have 10 heads. Like, what are you talking about?
I definitely experienced some pushback when I was at some of the other clubs before I had my own business. I was also younger. I think had I known what I know now, I would have been a little more firm and no, this is part of the lesson. But yeah, you get pushback because it takes a little time. But if you're skilled in your warm up, it shouldn't take that much time. You can do a nice warm up in 5, maybe 10 minutes. But yeah, it's just kind of setting that standard. This is what happens here. And, I've actually received a lot less pushback than I thought that I would. Now my students also know I'm a yoga instructor. Yeah. So I don't know if that helps, but I've been very pleasantly surprised. So it's just setting the tone. Maybe if you're the only one at your club doing it, maybe you're known as, hey, they're different. They actually do a warm up.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. And people see that, start seeing that you're doing that for them, really. I mean, you're trying to look after them, their best interest and their body. And, it's not just, I'm just, trying to stretch out this amount of time that I have with you. It's, let's take care of your body. Help me help you.
Yeah. And also it's not just injury prevention, but so that players play better right off the bat too. When you do these warm-ups, it could be the active dynamic warm-up or a little hand-eye coordination. Yeah. Maybe a little work through the fitness ladder. You're going to play that much better. Whereas when you don't do that, sometimes it takes 15 minutes, 20 minutes of a lesson to start hitting well because you're just stiff. You're not ready to go. So it's all around. It's for injury prevention, but it's also to play better and to make the most of your lessons. I believe, at least that's what I've really seen in my
Especially
clients.
If you have, you're working with adults who have been sitting on a desk all day, and then they go from sitting on a desk to all of a sudden they're playing tennis, running around in a clinic, and zero warm up. That's a recipe for an injury in an adult player.
Yeah. I don't know about you, but sitting for long periods is like the worst thing for my body. Maybe it's because I'm just used to being on the go all the time, but it feels strange to sit a lot. I can't imagine. And thank goodness, I'm very grateful. I don't have to sit at a desk for long periods of time for my job, unless I'm working on some admin stuff. But it's really tough. Yeah, you have players who come in after being at work all day, and now you're asking them to do the exact opposite and moving in all these different ways. And those are the people that really, really would benefit from it the most.
Yeah, I agree. And so how long have you been teaching yoga?
So I've been teaching yoga half the amount of time I've been teaching tennis. So if it's 23 years tennis, 13, or it might actually be 24 and 14 now. So yeah, I've been teaching a while.
Oh, wow. And
yeah, at first, before I started my business and I was at some of the local clubs in town, I would finish teaching tennis and then I would be at a local studio. It's called the Yoga Sanctuary here in Punta Gorda. I'm still there for one class a week, but I would finish my long tennis teaching days, do a quick change, and then I would go from my louder teaching voice to my softer teaching voice. And so that's where I really put in the bulk of my hours of teaching yoga and really learning how to teach and really honing my skills and getting those hours in of experience.
Oh my gosh, it's so funny that you say that because I am yoga certified, but like I was telling you before this recording, I've never actually taught yoga, but I am certified.
Okay.
And all that. But it's funny that you say that about the voice because, I'm teaching tennis all day and I'm super loud and they side, and people are like, why are you screaming? I'm still outside. I don't know. Like I need to bring it down.
That's funny, especially if you were used to teaching indoors. At one point, you really have to scream. I would lose my voice all day long when I was up north teaching. So that's one benefit of being outside for sure.
Yeah, and then finding that's got to be a little tricky finding that quick switch between being super energetic and loud as a tennis coach to being, all zen and how do you master that?
I would say what I was doing was not ideal because it was literally the fastest change into yoga clothes. Like it was so rushed, like it's so not yogic to do what I was doing to make this quick change. But the studio where I teach is pretty special. Oftentimes people walk in the door and they kind of exhale, and I guess I would feel that too. And if something magical happens when you teach, or at least it does for me, most of the time, the active teaching can actually elicit that same relaxation response in myself, almost like in just hearing the words and in slowing down. I don't know. I walk through the doors and it's almost, it just changed. Yeah. I don't want to say who I am, but just a different part of me came through, and people compliment me all the time on my teaching voice and how they think it's so relaxing. So it's kind of funny to me if people haven't seen me on the tennis court. And what was kind of cool about that situation when I was at the other clubs I mentioned, I would oftentimes have students join me for tennis, and at the end of the day, they would come join me for yoga in studio as well. So that was kind of nice. But as with anything, when you start to teach, you figure it out. It's just little by little, you find your way, and you listen to your own what. It's kind of like you just let the yoga do its magic as you're teaching others. You're taking in that same energy as well.
Yeah, and just an overall awareness of your voice and the tone of your voice. That's really important. And even just as a tennis coach, I think it takes some time as pros to even figure out your voice as a tennis coach. A lot of times,
definitely.
Start really shy, and then, you get that confidence, to be a little bit louder and a little bit more outspoken. And some pros are way louder than others. I'm definitely on the loud end. But, I think it definitely takes some time to develop that awareness, because it is important. It definitely builds a certain rapport with the students, depending on how you communicate. So it's really important. As a yoga instructor, I can't even imagine making that switch that quickly.
Well, one thing I think that we can learn from the yoga world is that let's say that, I'm sure you're familiar with this, a lot of tennis pros say too much on court. Like we're giving too many ideas, too many cues, and then the student's mind is spinning because they have that paralysis from analyzing everything that happens. So I think one thing that we can learn from teaching yoga is, we have to instruct students on what they're doing so they know what they're doing, but give them some space, in between those cues so that they can experience the posture, or so that they can experience, on the case of a tennis court, feeling the stroke, right?
Yes.
So that they too can figure things out.
Yeah. That's a perfect segue, actually, to my next question. I was going to ask you if you thought that practicing and teaching yoga has made you a better coach, and in which ways?
Definitely. So I came into it more for the yoga postures for injury prevention and recovering from injuries. So what's helpful about that is that, and this might be a way that actually you start teaching a little yoga. Maybe it can kind of sneak into your lessons a little bit. So oftentimes when I'm teaching a tennis lesson, the student will comment that they have, oftentimes I'll ask at the start of a lesson, hey, anything going on I should know about physically? And most of the time they say no, but sometimes they'll say, hey, my neck's kind of bothering me a little bit today. And maybe we'll just do one yoga pose to kind of see what we can relieve. So we might be there for about a minute or so before we start our warm up, or maybe it's after practicing the serve, something to help loosen up the shoulder, whatnot. So it helps me help the students in the moment in trying a posture here and there, if they feel the need, without doing an hour-long class. But with that said, over the years, I think the benefits of yoga have changed for me in that it's not just the physical aspect, but in the mental aspect. When I turned 40 years old, I decided that I really needed to start meditating. As an aging tennis pro, you're probably the same way. We always have multiple things going on in the body, even if they're not major, we're just aware of them. And I had really heard about the benefits of meditation as far as changing your perspective on pain within the body. So we can get very down as coaches. At least I hear this all the time from other coaches, that they get really down about their injuries. It can affect them negatively mentally. And so I wanted to start meditating so that I could experiment to see if that was true, if it helped me form a new relationship to the pains that I had going on with my body. And for me, that has been life-changing. I do meditate every day. So even if I don't do a formal posture practice, which most days I'll sneak in a couple postures sprinkled out throughout the day, it might not be an hour-long class. But I have found those benefits in meditation to help me not only be more positive when I have these things going on physically, but in quieting the mind and find a little more focus. And I try to bring those connections into my lessons. For example, as much as we say, watch the ball, what we really mean is focus in on the ball so that you're not thinking about all these other things that come up. If you've read The Inner Game of Tennis, I firmly believe that's a meditation book that uses tennis as its medium. When students are so overwhelmed by these cues that we're giving them, they're thinking too much. How many times has a student said, oh, there's so much to think about. There's so many things you're asking me to do. Simplify those things, have them focus in on the ball, not just look at it, but what can they see on the ball? Is it the seams of the ball, the writing on the ball, whatever it is, just as a tool to get them to focus. And if you tell them, okay, just watch the ball, don't do anything else. Notice how many times your mind goes to something else and keep inviting yourself back. That's essentially what a meditation is. Yeah. So we sit on our cushion. We're not expected to not think of nothing, which is what a lot of people think meditation is, but it's just watching what comes up for us mentally and just inviting ourselves to come back to where we are physically. It might be the breath that's our mental focus. You could, in essence, focus on a picture of a tennis ball, or maybe you have your eyes open and you're literally looking at a tennis ball. It's finding something to focus in on and inviting yourself back over and over again. And over time, the times that our mind goes away from that focus is lengthened a bit more. And so I'm just trying to make these connections that I've learned myself in my tennis lessons with my tennis students as things come up spontaneously. The breath comes up every day in every single lesson. So I use that a lot. Yes, that's another great tool, just to have students and focusing on their breath as they hit a ball, focusing on that exhalation as they hit a ball, just to take their mind off of all of the other things. So those are simple tools, students can use apart from lessons and in matches when they feel tight, when they feel nervous, just to ground themselves and focusing on that one thing, that mental focus, that breath, apart from the physical postures that we're all very aware of.
Yeah, I think a match itself can be very meditative. I mean, you see Nadal, for example, he has all these crazy routines. I think that's almost like his meditation. It's like his way of getting himself to stay focused, because it's just like so repetitive, that he knows exactly what he's focusing on, to stay, like focusing on, his different little quirks kind of helps him stay focused with and present in what's happening in that moment, instead of, thinking about the point that he just missed, or the ball that he just missed, or, what's going to happen within the next game. Just staying present is one of the main things in that you learn from meditation, right? So
Definitely.
I think
that's the goal. It's not to sit there and not think of nothing, but it's to realize your habits in everyday life. So whether it's on the tennis court, or maybe you're just doing the dishes and you realize that you're rushing and you're constricting your breath. Oh, it doesn't have to be this way. It just allows you to be more aware of what you're doing in everyday life. And on a tennis court, that's huge, because as soon as you notice that you're feeling a certain way, you have a choice in most cases, okay, let me just focus on my breath. Let me focus on my routine, these things that give us comfort so that we can focus in the present moment a little bit more.
Yeah. One of the, say, routines that I've learned through meditation and breath work is, because, okay, let me go back a little bit. So meditation kind of helps you with, overall awareness of yourself, your thought process, right? And being present. And I started doing this thing when I'm playing a match. It's like a little bit of breath work / meditation. I don't know what category would go in, but I would just focus on my breathing and extending my exhales when I see myself freaking out, like say in between points. And that has such tremendous impact. Just doing that, just being aware first, okay, I'm freaking out, right? And then secondly, what am I going to do about it? Okay, I have this thing that I can go into, which is,
you got your tools.
And count to 6, on your exhale, and then just kind of bring yourself down for the next point, So just having little tools.
That's excellent. I love that.
Yeah. So
and those are things that you learn on the mat, but you were able to bring them on court. And we all know you're going to learn it for the first time in that difficult match situation. You have to learn it, let's say, on the mat or with the teacher in a controlled environment. And if you practice that enough times, just like practice on a court, you repeat something over and over again. And then little by little, you find that trickle into your match setting. So that's why I think the yoga mat is just a great way to practice some of these things of centering yourself, your breath, becoming more aware of your habits. And then little by little, you can bring them onto the court, into your game. And as you've already experienced, you're feeling the benefits of being able to do that. And it's challenging for players who haven't tried yoga before. I always say, you just don't hear about why it's good for you. Just go take a class. You have to experience the class. I think feeling is believing. Now, in my case, I didn't enjoy my first few experiences. So if that's your case, try a different type of class, try a different type of instructor. You mentioned that you came into it through hot yoga. My first classes were labeled power yoga. So, I wouldn't recommend to that someone necessarily in their 40s or their 50s, but go to a type of class that appeals to you, because there's so many different types of classes. And the aim is the same. It's just to get you more aware of what's happening with your body, experiencing potential discomfort in a posture, and observing how you handle that mentally, right? We're uncomfortable on a tennis court and we have to say, okay, this is happening. How can I respond? I have a choice in the way that I respond. We don't have to throw that racket if we feel like throwing that racket.
We've all been there.
So we just learn a lot. We've all done it. So we just can learn a lot from being on the mat, but you have to give it a chance. And if your initial chances aren't your favorite, just give it another chance. Just like when you go take a tennis lesson, if you didn't enjoy that lesson from a certain instructor, I hope that you didn't stop playing tennis. You just tried a different setting or a different instructor, someone that spoke to you.
Yeah. What's funny to me is how some people, I'll try to tell them about meditation and they go, or even with yoga, and they go, oh, I'm terrible at that. I can't quiet my mind. Are you kidding me? I'm like, do you think I'm good at it? First of all, I'm not. And secondly, nobody's good at it. Nobody starts good at it anyway, because just think about the first time you grabbed a tennis racket. Were you good at it? No. Nobody's
Exactly.
at expert level, but there's all these benefits.
I think in this day and age too, we're asking people to focus, which is challenging because we have all of these distractions. Our world is built on distracting us now with all of these devices and everything moving so quickly.
Yeah.
So we just really have to start somewhere, for that person that's really challenged and slowing down and being with themselves. Meditation might not be the right entrance into yoga. They need to go to maybe a vinyasa style class where they're going to be moving a little bit more to keep them, I don't want to say entertained, but to keep them engaged. And I would argue that these slower restorative classes are the more advanced yoga classes, right? Meditation is more advanced because we're asking someone to sit in stillness. Remember that the postures of yoga were created in order to prepare bodies to be able to sit for long periods of time. So for some, meditation might be the entrance, but for many, it might not. For me, it definitely wasn't in the power yoga that I was initially interested in it. And it wasn't until, I had kept hearing about its benefits and I had other motives, although you're not supposed to meditate to come out with a specific result. I had that motive of seeing if it helped me with my relationship to pain, and maybe players just start for 5 minutes. Maybe you just set your smartphone for 5 minutes. Maybe it's 1 minute. What can you do to just kind of sit? And that's a valid practice in the beginning. And little by little, you might crave more, you might not. It doesn't make it more right or wrong. It's just getting it in when you can, how you can.
Yeah. So do all your tennis lessons, like your private lessons and your group lessons, have an element of yoga to it? What's your, say, structure around it? Meaning like, how much time you spend on tennis and how much time you spend on yoga?
It's not a formal structure. I mean, sometimes, I have specialty classes, for example, that I lead once a month with Michelle Krause, where it's a cardio tennis class combined with yoga for tennis. So that one's very obvious. We do an hour of cardio tennis and then the group does yoga for tennis immediately following. So that's clear cut in what we're doing. As far as my private clients and clinics, we don't say, hey, we're practicing yoga. But like I mentioned before, we do certain things, like we do the dynamic warm-ups. I'm reminding them of their breathing. As things come up, yoga might come up. It's more of the philosophy behind certain things. But sometimes I have clients that, I had one client who, when she comes, some days it's tennis and some days it's yoga. It just depends on what her body's feeling, what she feels that she needs. In this case, she too was recovering from a low back injury. So if she's feeling great, she comes in for tennis. If she's not, hey, it's yoga today. And then I have other clients that we do kind of half and half. I generally prefer to start with the tennis and end with the yoga just because it's a little slower. Yeah. However, it depends on the way we're practicing the yoga, right? If we practice it a little more dynamically, it would serve as a wonderful yoga practice. If we're holding postures, that might serve as a better cool down if we're holding a particular stretch. But as we know, yoga isn't just stretching. And I like to say this because on the internet, I see all the time, oh, I need to do yoga because I need to stretch. We're not just stretching in yoga. We're building strength. We're working on our balance, super important for tennis. You can even work on your agility. So there's just so many benefits to the practice depending on what you need. And I like to kind of make that a little more of an individual experience, even if it's not formal. Hey, we're practicing yoga in a particular lesson or a clinic.
And even yoga itself is a very general term because yoga, includes the asanas, which are the physical postures that we all think of as the yoga practice.
Yes.
There's also pranayama, which is your breath work, meditation, and, there's, all these different philosophies and all these other things that you can also get into. But what you hear about for the most part, it comes down to breath work, meditation, and the physical postures. Those are the main ones, I guess, that we can derive benefits from as athletes without getting into more of the philosophical and spiritual, aspects of yoga, right? Am I correct in that?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that a lot of the philosophy is beneficial as well. It just might not be where you come into it, right? Maybe someone who's more seasoned in their yoga practice and they begin to gain that interest. And that's where you can have the other limbs of yoga trickle in to the tennis.
Yeah. What do you think are the main ways that yoga can help tennis players? That we've talked about, there's all these obvious benefits, but let's just kind of break them down a little bit. What are the main benefits in your opinion?
So, we've already mentioned injury prevention, right? None of us want to get injured. And, look at the pros. They have, at least the top level pros, they have all the best resources available to them, and they still get injured. It's just a fact. Sometimes it's not what we're doing wrong. It's just part of the game. You overuse your body and it breaks down. We have these overuse injuries. To some extent, it's inevitable. And to some extent, it depends on what the body you were born with, whether you're more prone or not. So injury prevention is huge, of course. I really like yoga for recovery, especially these days. I'm going to say that I use it for that for myself. So at the end of a long teaching day, so I'll get off court, I'll take a shower so my body is warm, and that's when I'll practice. Yesterday I did maybe like half an hour to 40 minutes of some work on my back. So in that case, you're not practicing postures that require a lot of muscular effort, but postures that are a little more passive in nature with props. I like to use the myofascial release balls or tennis balls as well. So I like to use yoga as a way for me to feel better when I get off court. You know how tired we are. Pretty much any tennis pro, when you get off of a court from teaching all day, especially if you're in Florida and you're in the heat, you don't feel like doing anything else. It's dinner time. You don't even feel like cooking. It's a lot to get yourself into the shower. You just feel dead. Those are the days that it's most important for you to practice yoga. And I'm going to say that almost always I don't want to do it, but I make myself do it. And I'm always so happy that I did. You just have a sense that you've done something good for yourself. You've practiced that self-care. You feel better in your body. You feel more relaxed. I don't know about you, but mentally, when I get off a tennis court from all that yelling and all of that output as a coach, I feel drained mentally. And, sometimes it's hard to come home to your spouse. They don't have that type of job. They're ready to go. They want to go out to dinner. They want to be social. God. And
story of my life.
For me, I'm like done. I know you need that time. So for me, the restorative aspect also gives me some quiet time to transition in my day. I feel like I'm a better coach. I'll be better the next time I go out on court physically, but I might be a better wife also. Who knows? We can ask my husband about that. But I need that quiet time, especially for me. I'm actually quite introverted. I'm most extroverted when I'm my teaching self out on court and my teaching self with regards to the yoga. But other than that, I really need the quiet time to recharge.
Yeah.
So I love it for restoring the body to recover so that I can get back out on court the next day with these. And also for our mental game, whether it's our mental health, right? A lot of players are bringing this into our awareness that it's an issue on tour, and we don't have to be on tour for our mental health to be worked on. So we just provide ourselves the opportunity, in a meditative type practice or even in a restorative practice where we've slowed things down, to to put ourselves in I don't want to say a safe space, but in a state of mind that allows us to handle everything else in a better way.
Yeah. It's so funny that you say that because, after teaching, if I have a long day, I don't want to hear anybody talk to me. I don't even want to hear my own thoughts. I'm like, I just want to sleep. And sometimes that's what I take a nap, and then I'm a better person after my nap. But yeah, if just taking the time to stretch and be quiet and relax, oh my gosh, that makes such a huge difference. I'm more of a morning person when it comes to yoga and meditation. I like to do it first thing in the morning. So I don't usually do it at night, but I would think doing it at night will be probably beneficial for sleep too. And
yes, it would.
So maybe I need
yes, it would. Yeah, maybe just one pose, like a legs up the wall pose, or a Baddha Konasana, reclined cobbler's pose with support, something like that to set the stage for good sleep as part of your sleep hygiene. I meditate in the morning. Depending on the morning, I might get a couple postures in. They might be sprinkled out through my day. Oftentimes if I teach in the morning and the afternoon, I'll use a 20-minute restorative posture as a recharge. But sometimes I fall asleep. I'm so tired. That's not the goal of a restorative yoga pose. But sometimes I'll fall asleep. I set my timer, and if that happens, I just say, well, that's what my body was calling for, and that's a valid practice. So you don't feel like doing anything, but in that case of the restorative posture, you set yourself up in a way that you're taking a passive stretch, maybe something that's opposite to what we do on the court all day, maybe something that has a little bit more of a slight back bend in nature, where we're opening the front body, would be very appropriate for all of the forward bending that we do on court, just as an example.
Yeah, there's a lot of spine work and, and shoulder work, I guess everything in yoga, but, with tennis being, there's all this rotation movement, right? With tennis,
yes,
the shot that you use that, that's where I see the big correlation with all the yoga poses and all the different stretches. But, there's a lot of pro athletes in all kinds of sports, not just tennis, that are, posting on Instagram. They're practicing yoga, they're doing meditation. And, who knows at what point in their career they started getting into that. I would think maybe once they were at a professional level is what I'm thinking for the most part. Is when it happens for me and for you as well. It happened as adults, and yes. I really wish, and this is something that I would love to do in the future, is to kind of incorporate yoga, meditation with kids and with juniors.
Definitely.
I think it's such a huge area to go into as tennis coaches, and the younger that you can start, the better, because it's changed my life. It changed your life. And there's so many benefits, not just for tennis, but for your whole life, that if we can kind of introduce this into juniors, it would be, amazing. But there's so much resistance from the players and from sometimes parents. So how do you think we can maybe start breaking through those challenges, in your opinion?
So definitely, I agree with you. First of all, I think that the younger kids today, they're much more open to these types of practices than maybe our age group when you talk to, and maybe I'm not going to call men out specifically, but some of the men also might not be as open to the practice. Ironically, the practice was created originally for men only, and now it seems like it's the opposite. But I was a part of a virtual tennis camp with Emma Burgic-Bucko last summer for her kids camp, and we did yoga for tennis virtually through Zoom, because she lives about 3 hours away from me. And I was really impressed with how great the kids were, even on a Zoom. So she had a big screen. She had their mat set up with their rackets and the balls as I requested. And the kids were so adorable and so attentive. and they loved it, and they were really open to it. So I think you're right that we have to start with the young kids and the juniors, kind of like the stretching, just make it, this is part of what we do as tennis players for our body, for our minds. A lot of players, they have these coaches that they're already working on their mental game, these sports psychologists. This is not that big of a leap from that. It's just that we're kind of calling it something else.
Yeah.
So especially if you're part of an academy, maybe just starting off with a special event, a class, I'm kind of doing these things too, all around, just to kind of open people's eyes. I think we need to get people to try it.
Yeah.
Again, it might not be a full hour class, but as things come up, hey, let's try this together, or as part of a warm up, or maybe one pose as part of a cool down. Maybe you call it stretching, even though it's a yoga pose.
Yeah.
Right. And I think parents would be open to it, especially, they're worried about their kids with regards to injury and how long they can be out. Do a pose that helps with a particular area of the body that they're struggling with.
Yeah.
But I find in general, even more so than 5 years ago when I started this quest, people are much more open now, I feel, than even just a few years ago. Poor pros are talking about it much more. First, it was just Djokovic, but now I remember even last year seeing JJ Wolf saying he did his yoga, his recovery in the evening, and it's becoming pretty accepted for the male and the female players. As you mentioned in the intro, I'm excited that I'm going to be part of the Sarasota Open, an ATP tournament this year, where I'm going to be providing yoga for the players. So I hope that many of them take advantage of it. I did this with an ITF level tournament last year for WTA players. They loved it. They came by themselves. They came with doubles partners. They found friends to come with, and we formed our own little mini sessions for 20 and 30 minutes. And they were just so happy to have something that was provided for them, to care for them. Oftentimes they only have one physio on site, and that physio is tied up, and they have a lot of downtime also. Players have a lot of downtime in these tournaments where they're waiting around to get on court, just sitting for hours. I know how difficult that is, not just physically, how hard it is to be ready, but mentally. So that's a great time to have a yoga mat in your bag, pull it out in the gym or in the grass somewhere in the shade, and try a couple postures. Obviously, they will have had to learn a little bit on their own to get confident to do that on their own. But that's really what I try to do on my YouTube channel, and offering one posture at a time, or a little mini class for people to try. Maybe they do it with a recording initially, and maybe they feel confident enough to try it on their own after doing it a few times after having watched the video.
Yeah. I just want to say, I want to encourage pros, first of all, tennis pros, to start a yoga practice, because it's going to benefit them immensely, not just physically, but mentally, spiritually, if you want, everything. And then, it'll get to a point where you won't be able to help yourself and want the same for your players, and
right. It has to come from us first, because if we don't believe in it, you're not going to tell your students to do something that you don't do. We're all passionate about the same things that we've tried and we've loved. And so it has to come from that place for sure.
Right. But anyway, thank you so much. I've enjoyed this conversation immensely. I am very passionate about yoga. And like I said,
Thank you. I'm so happy about that.
Oh my gosh, I love it. And I really do mean it. I have to figure out a way to do this, but I want to bring this to kids somehow. To kids, junior players. I think if you're in an academy and you're not incorporating this, I think you're missing out immensely, as a coach, and even as a junior player. And then as a kid, if you can start kind of doing some of the stretches, just even a 1-minute meditation, I think it'd be so beneficial in their future. I think, like, I really, not to get all woo woo and crazy, but I really do think that that would change the world if everybody took 2 minutes to meditate a day, I think.
Well, I agree with you.
World.
I agree with you. And, there are some things that are helping. I'm going to be at the USPTA Florida conference presenting yoga for tennis in June, and I'll be exposed to more coaches. So I'm trying my best to get out there and expose yoga to tennis coaches. You can do it in your academy, even if it's one student at a time. It starts that way, just setting the example ourselves, and we'll spread it that way. And in conversations like these, I so appreciate you inviting me on to be able to talk about this, because obviously that's my passion. It's a passion of yours, and let's just keep talking about it and setting a great example for everybody.
Absolutely. And Margit, where can people find you?
So people can find me on several ways. So I have a website, playtennispracticeyoga.com. So that's all together. I have an Instagram page at playtennispracticeyoga, and a YouTube channel, Play Tennis, Practice Yoga, . And I offer weekly tips on Tuesdays, yoga for tennis tips, but they could also be mindful tennis practices. So if you actually go on my YouTube channel, you'll see a bunch of different playlists depending on what you're wanting. Yoga before tennis, yoga after tennis, yoga for recovery, mini classes. So please get on there. I really love for tennis players and coaches to try these out. Please give me your feedback. I really want live feedback from real tennis pros, real tennis players, or if there's something that you want to see, I'm willing to put that out there. And I just love talking to coaches and players about yoga and fulfilling any questions that anybody has.
And what's the best way to contact you? Just through Instagram or email?
Email probably. I'm Margit Bannon, MargitBannon @gmail.com. So, especially if you're interested in a special event for your club or something like that. Excitingly enough, Michelle Krause and I, as a little teaser, are working on some things coming up at the end of the year to perhaps bring our combination, our efforts of the cardio tennis aspect with the intensity fitness that we've been doing at my place with yoga for tennis to some other areas in Florida first and beyond. So look out for that. Yeah, definitely. If you want to be added to my newsletter list, definitely shoot me an email or contact me through the other platforms, and you'll be informed of what's going on in the yoga for tennis world, at least through my end.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Margit. And we'll talk to you soon. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you all for listening to Vida Tennis. I hope you enjoyed our conversation centered around yoga for tennis. And I truly, truly just want to encourage everyone in tennis to start a yoga and or meditation practice. It will benefit you on and off the court. I promise you, you will not regret it. Please remember to subscribe so you get notified when episodes are posted. You can follow Vida Tennis on Instagram. Our handle is simply Vida Tennis Podcast. You can also email me at vidatennispodcast@gmail.com. Feel free to leave me a review. Those can be very helpful so that other professionals in the tennis industry can find this type of content. I hope you have a fantastic day filled with tennis.